Oh, there are like several people being removed. So come back in. Once the recording started, there were like some message that indicate that a few of you will be removed. So come back in. For those who have just removed, we just wait for a while. Initially, there were 56. One person will remove. Okay, so the everybody's on board, so I'm going to start now. Last week we have gone through soil chemistry, but in reality we have more than chemistry. So the only three that only be covered for your lecture. Now, what we're going to cover for this lecture will be on soil biology. Now, when we talk about soil biology, we're going to learn about the living things, because actually soil biology is one small part of a bigger component we call soil organic matter, which will be the next lecture. Now, I hope that you all can stand until maybe 4 o'clock. I believe I can finish both lecture at the same time. Hopefully I can. Yeah. So without further ado, let's start. The content of this lecture will encompass everything living things. So we're going to learn about organisms, beginning from soil fauna, flora, and a few key organisms that we're going to focus on, namely earthworms, arthropods. There is a spelling mistakes over there. Arthropods supposed to be nematodes, bacteria, and most importantly, why do we even know them? Because why? They serve a purpose in the soil. So let's move on. Now, when we talk about native soil, soil is not just consists of mineral phase, as we learned before. It got air, it got moisture, and then one part apart from that is this one. Most of the time, people misunderstood that this living thing is only considered as the soil organic matter, but actually there are more than that, which will be explained in the next lecture. But for this slide, we're only going to learn about the living things, and it's called soil biology. And this diagram actually shows you clearly why they are so important. Because when we learn about the food web inside the soil organism plays a major role in the nutrient recycling. Now, as you know, nutrients is important for plants, but you see, these nutrients sometimes they are not available readily for the plants. Something needs to happen, whether by weathering as we learned last week from soil chemistry, but somehow this nutrient can be liberated and made available to plants with the help of a few soil organisms, as you can see right there. You can see a lot, starting from the large mammals over here, animals. I would say these are mammals. Well, the shape looks like a rat, but let's count it out, because the rest of it, it could be reptiles. Now, maybe after this, when you look at the entire lecture slide, reptiles does not seem to play a large role, but they do. And their role is quite similar to the large animals, as you can see right there. But the major role played by these organisms are of smaller ones, insects, worms, and microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, and so on. Now we're going to go one by one according to these different organisms. But this soil food web shows you that based on this different organism, it reminiscence of the food chain that we have for humans. You remember that there's like a triangle where humans usually is placed on top, the apex predator, and then on that at the bottom, moving down the bottom of the triangle, you have a lot of organisms, and usually those that sit at the bottom are the smallest one and is herbivore. That is almost looks like that, except that this is like a lot of flow chart that indicates their relationship, but they are actually the same. This one represents the food chain in the soil itself. Of course, lah, human don't live inside, so you don't see them, lah. Yeah. So the bigger part that you need to look at before you look at soil organism is the organic matter. So whatever organic, whatever that contains carbon, majority of them counts as this one, soil organic matter. Now, in this so-called component, there are like four small components you can see right there. So, now, as you can see there, there are fresh residue. There are living organisms, and then followed by two major parts, which are the stabilized organic matter and decomposing organic matter. By the way, the direction should start with living organisms, yeah, because living organisms are those that are still living, yeah, still not dead yet. Once they die, they become fresh residue. Okay, and then after that, immediately they are subjected to decomposition by bacteria, fungus, and so on. So they becomes decomposing matter, and finally, when they reaches the end stage of the decomposition, where the rate slows down, there they call stabilized organic matter, or in other words, humus, we call it. So the fractions, I don't think it is that important. These fractions are just for guideline because it actually subjected to the conditions of the soil and also the climate. But you see the difference. The majority of them are stabilized organic matter or the decomposing one. Yeah. So classification of organism, as you may have learned from biology, there are plants, there are animals, fungi, and then there are so on. Now, no, we're not going to learn biology once again, so this is just like a guideline for you. But as you can see right there, inside the soil, these are the things that you may see. Of course, the number and the proportion might be different. Animals, as you know, are large and they need to move. So staying inside the soil is actually not normal, but they do. Some does, yeah. And I think furthermore in this slide, there are no examples of animals because frankly speaking, animals, they are mostly on the surface, not in the surface. Well, at least in Malaysia lah. I never learned in biology, Malaysia biology, that their animals stay inside the soil. But if you look at temperate countries like United States, they have a lot of animals actually stay inside because temperate countries, there are four seasons. During winter, where do they go? They go underground and they hibernate. That's why they have it. In Malaysia, you don't need to hibernate lah, yeah, kan? Because we never have winter. The rest of it, majority of them is quite safe to say is either plantae, fungi, and protista or monera. So these are the proportion. Okay, so the diversity. I think I have already jumped a little bit by mentioning the proportion. Here they are saying that inside the soil, even though when you grab a piece of soil and you can't see anything, in reality, there are a lot of things. One examples. One example, when you take the soil samples, last time when you take soil samples from behind DK Delta, you put it inside the bag. The next day when you come back, what happened to the inner parts of the bag? You have vapor, kan? Water vapor. That is the sign of respiration. Why the respiration? Why there is a respiration there? Because they are living organisms. I don't know what is that, but I know something is breathing inside. Right. Well, it's quite safe to say that it's your bacteria actually. Okay. Now, aeration, acidity, cool or warm temperature, moist or dry condition, localized condition. So these are the conditions that determines the healthiness of the ecosystem. Now, a soil cannot exist just by mineral itself because in the soil, it seems like there is an ecosystem. Something need to move on. And in order to have this to move, you must have some organism to cycle the nutrient. You see, the nutrient is already in the mineral, but without living organisms, the cycle does not move and the soil is very much dead. So that's why a soil, even though they have nutrient, they must have living organisms in order to represent its overall healthiness. It is healthy only when you have living organisms inside. Okay, the third point, the population of soil organism tends to be concentrated in zones of favorable condition rather than evenly distributed throughout the soil. So I want to ask you a question lah. Well, you can switch on your mic to answer this one. If you are the soil organism, do you want to stay deep inside the soil or nearer to the surface? And why? Yeah, I can switch on your mic to answer this question. Where do you want to live? Deep inside the soil or on the surface? And why? Someone?
Near to the surface
Near
Okay,
surface.
near surface. Why?
because more nutrient.
Yeah,
can
because
easily get
near to the surface, sir.
okay, and why?
easily to get
Because
like uh,
Yes,
Sunlight,
you got air, you got
sunlight,
nutrient.
easily get
nutrient.
nutrients
Yeah,
and
so I mean
water.
that's already, I mean, and yeah, that is enough, because actually what you said earlier about the availability of oxygen, yeah, because when you I mean, some bacteria can live without oxygen, but in that condition the bacteria produce some toxic material that will ultimately kill themselves. So most of the bacteria or the microorganism rather stay in the surface. That's one. Number two is they get nutrient. Now, this nutrient coming from the litters, the dead leaves that they fall down. So where do they come from? They come from the trees. Okay, now not only this organism lives on the surface, they also lives on the surface and near to the tree, because it seems like tree majority. I mean, most of the time the tree will feed them those dead leaves. Those are the source of their nutrient. But there's one more. I think not many people realize that on the surface you have sunlight. You see, organisms, some of them, they may have chlorophyll. So they don't need to recycle nutrient from dead leaves or organic matter from the trees. They themselves can generate their own nutrient if they have chlorophyll. And what they need to do is they just need to stay near the surface, receive sunlight. They have carbon dioxide, they have sunlight, they have water. There you go. They can manufacture their own nutrient. So that's why most of the organisms that you see right here, majority of them stays near the surface. Okay, by definition of near the surface is between 15 to 20 centimeters deep from the surface. Okay, from the surface, the definition of surface is from the surface of the soil and 15 meters into the soil, 15 centimeters deep. Those are considered surface. Yeah. So, okay, a few examples of the so-called soil organism. Let's begin with soil fauna. Fauna means animal, animalia. So these are the things that moves actively. You can see them move, and it could be single cell. Most of them single cell, some of them multi cells, but majority of single cell. Let's begin with the larger size, macrofauna. Macro means fauna animal, larger animals, things that you can see. And the size, more than 0.5 mm. And these are the ones that actually will going to shred bigger particles, big organic matters that need to be breaks down into smaller pieces. These are the ones. Wow, mice, squirrels, these are the mammals. I don't know squirrels actually stay inside the soil. What I know, Malaysian squirrels like to climb trees. So I don't know. Mice, maybe, mice, especially those in the paddy fields. They actually is known to actually burrow underground in the paddy fields, and this is where they live. Now, insects is very normal, very, very normal. Wherever you go inside the soil, you will see ants. Now, ants belongs to the insect family. But let's not forget, these are the large ones, yeah? More than 0.5 mm. Snails and snakes, yeah. Snakes, just now I say I don't see too much of red cloud. Okay, so this is what. Definitely snakes lives inside the soil. That is for sure, yeah? So these are your centipedes. Now, there is a saying last time, why do you always want to kill centipedes? Is because centipedes is known to be toxic. But if you are an agronomist, these are the things that you should have inside your soil. Because centipedes is said to be the major organisms in the soil that breaks down the nutrient, the larger ones, compared to earthworms. Centipedes works much more faster, and they actually breathe also much more faster than worms. Worms is too slow lah, but they also do the job. Centipedes is much more faster. Yeah. Okay, moving on. The next size is mesofauna. Middle size between 0.1 to 2 mm. Wait, I think there must be some mistake here. I believe this one is 0.1 to 0.2 mm. Or probably you can check later. You can check and you go Google mesofauna, what is the size? This cannot be 2 mm. I think this must be not correct. Check again, yeah, the size. Now this one is a bit smaller. Sometimes you can still see it, sometimes you don't. Now this may include insects or arthropods. Now, I may ask you, does arthropods count as insect? The answer is yes. Arthropods is one small part of the insect. Insect is a big group. It can encompass a lot of things, insect. Arthropods, if you want to consider that, they will have, arthropods are these organisms will have segmented exoskeleton. After this, we're going to go through the details, yeah. And the examples could be mites. So these are the kumbang, you can call it, yeah. The kumbang that actually decompose dead bodies. That's why you always see this when from dead bodies or horror films. Now this one is a bit more adorable. It's called water bears, and you possibly have seen this before in a what Marvel movie, Ant-Man. Remember when when these guys shrink down? They pass over one giant animal. This is the one. Actually, it's quite small, microscopic. You cannot see it with your naked eye. You have to use microscope. Hey, coming even smaller, microfauna. This one is in microscopic range. Nematodes is actually worms, microscopic worms that is almost the same size with water bears, but probably a bit longer, thinner but longer. And it also consists of bacteria like amoeba, as you can see, right? A single cell amoeba bacteria. Yeah. Okay, moving on, another class, soil flora. These are sometimes called plants, but if you look carefully, it's more than plants lah. Now, plants that you can see right there have chlorophyll. They can manufacture their own glucose. Those include moss and also feeder roots. Moss you can see right here. In Bahasa Melayu, you call it lumut. And moss actually is quite important in terms of soil formation. Later on, I'll give you a link to a video, and they actually explain to you once a rock is available on the earth, how earth slowly turns into the soil that you can see today. And one of the organisms that does that, is part of that, is moss. That one is feeder roots. Now these roots actually lives, well, feeder roots actually, as the name is mentioned, they actually stay near the roots. Nothing much I can show you. Moving on to the next one, microflora. They consist of algae, bacteria, actinomyces, microorganism. Whatever you can see right here, they are actually microscopic, and usually it's the whitish color of fungus that you can see. Sometimes they appear in black colored fungus near the roots. So these are the good ones, because without this microflora, the nutrients will not be recycled. These are the major, I would say these are the major organism in the soil that does all the decomposition and makes the nutrient available to plants. And furthermore, from 1 teaspoon of soil, these are the ratio or the breakdowns of organism that might contain in one small teaspoon of soil. It may contain 100 nematodes, 250 algae, and so on. Now, the point here is, in a healthy soil, it's very diverse. They can have as many number of organisms as you can see on the lecture slide. And it's not surprising, because if you look at the numbers, it becomes larger when the organisms become smaller. See that? Bacteria is the smallest guy, and the numbers comes up to like 100 million. Now that is because the smaller the organism, the deeper they can go into the micropore. And inside the micropore, they are very safe. That's why they can thrive. Unless something happens, that's something I'll explain later. Yeah. So these are the composition, you can see. The number and the biomass, as we saw earlier, those from the surface with 15 centimeters deep is very rich in all the so-called organism. And like I said to you just now, the smaller the smaller the organism, the larger the composition. Yeah. So I've done with the introduction of soil biology. Next, I'm going to move on to the major things lah, as you can say in soil science, because earthworms is said to be an interesting topic. They serve a lot of purpose in the soil, and I'm sure you have seen a worm before. For those who haven't seen one, okay, this is how it looks like. Well, this is the most beautiful image of a worm can be shown to you lah, because if you want to see the real worms, I actually can show you some, but I think this is better lah. So what does earthworms do? It's not like horror movie. See, earthworms actually is quite tame and they are not that scary actually. Now, what earthworms do is that they will live inside the soil and they help you clean up your mess. Now, the mess that I meant here is the dirty things from living organism. That includes the feces. Do you know what is a feces? Feces is what you generate after you eat your food. I think you should know that. Human waste, for example. Not just human waste, it could be dead trees, dead organic matter, that includes animal as well. So whatever died, these guys are going to come in and eat it. It's the dirty things. So in essence, earthworms have a very major role in recycling the nutrients from dead animals or dead organic matter. So the first part that they do is they live inside the soil. Now, when they live, they need to move around, and they create all these so-called small channel. They call burrows. Now, with these small holes, they enable the air to get inside and enables some smaller organism to live because air can go deeper inside the soil. Now, apart from that, once the weather, okay, once there's a raining episode, there are rain, they have like surface runoff. These water may seeps into these holes. And then what's good about these holes is that they will stay there. It's just like the capillary function. You have four small channel. Once rains comes in, they just like sponge and soak all this rainwater. So they serve two purposes there. Number one, they becomes a reservoir of water. Why they so important? Because plants absorb water. And then the other one, if the soil can absorb water from the runoff, they actually can minimize the risk of flooding. They can minimize the risk of erosion. So earthworms indirectly can help that. And then number three, tillage done by earthworm can replace some expensive tillage work done by machinery. Do you know what is tillage? I'm sure some of you know, but if you don't know what is tillage in Bahasa Melayu is called bajak. So you have kerbau and you have those tanja, and then you tolak to create air inside, isn't it? Now, earthworm can do it without having to use all this machinery. Because why? This earthworm can, they just move around and your soil is already cukup gembur actually. It's already have a lot of air inside that you don't need manual tillage. So another advantage there for farmers. Point number four, during drought, these tunnels allow deep plant root penetration into subsoil region of higher moisture content. Now, when the soil can absorb more moisture, it is said to like allows the soil to keep this moisture for a long time to allow the trees or whatever the plants to absorb this moisture. So, like I think this is quite similar to point number two, lah, yeah. Okay, point number two, I think is a bit different. Point number two mentioned vertical earthworms burrows pipe air deeper into the soil, stimulating microbial nutrient cycling at those deeper levels. So this is about the accessibility of air, lah, yeah. Now, what you can see right here is actually the real image from a actual research article, a research paper published by a researcher years before. And this is how it looks like. For a soil column with a depth of 60 centimeter, these are the so-called images or the area where the earthworm can burrow. They sometimes can burrow like a small channel. Some of them go all the way into deeper area. And if this experiment can can show deeper areas. I believe they can go even deeper than 60 centimeter. And you can see right there, most of these earthworms, they actually does all this so-called channeling. They create all this burrow, this channeling, so that, now as you can see right there, if the water can seep on the surface, most of the water will keep deeper down. And you can see that's a whole purpose why, and that's the reason why earthworms are so important into the soil. They create these things. Okay, worms also needs to eat, and they also need to go to the toilet. You see, they don't have a toilet. They just relieve themselves whenever they go. Is it good or bad? Maybe bad for the worm. But I tell you, these things is very good. Very good. Why? Because whatever whatever the feces that they got out from their body, it actually stays in the burrow, in the holes. Okay, the channels where they move through, and they stays there. You see, this so-called feces, we have a different name for these worms. We call it worm cast at point number 2. Okay, so whenever they go, they expel this worm cast, and actually this worm cast is one of the best fertilizers available for plants. Don't believe me? Have a look at the table. See, they are comparing between the nutrient content of sandy soil versus worm cast. Now you can see that sandy soil is said to be no nutrient because sand have no ability to absorb nutrient. But in this study, they still have 7.5%, which is quite impressive actually. But anyway, as compared to worm cast is 20%. That is a lot, I tell you. And not to mention other source of nutrient like calcium. Calcium not much, but it's still some there. Potassium, of course, they are not comparable to the sandy soil, but as you can see right there, nitrogen and phosphorus, these are the highest ones. Okay, so you can see why worm casts are so important. And for information, if you're into planting something like, there's a fertilizer they call worm cast fertilizer. Yeah, people sell worm cast as a fertilizer because of that. Okay, more evidence of the good worm cast as fertilizer. So earlier we have seen nitrogen, phosphorus, and so on. This table from another source shows you the other benefits of worm cast. So as you can see right there, with worm cast, the soil seems to have a lower bulk density. Okay, now if anybody have seen a worm cast before, it's like it's calcium. There's some calcium over there. When you press it, it's just like pasir lembut. But once you press it, you will notice that inside the worm cast is majority air. It's very light. You see, they are very light, very porous, and they have a lot of nutrient. That helps a lot with the soil. And then next part is, surprisingly, the CEC also is very high. Okay, you must be wondering why, kan? Because when earthworms eat, they are not just eating the organic matter. They also eat a small amount of mineral soil. Okay, now this mineral soil, mostly they're clay. So when clay accumulate inside the body and they are cast out as worm cast, that is why they have high CEC. Most of these CEC are contributed by the clay itself. Yeah. And then, of course, when you look at exchangeable calcium and exchangeable potassium, do you understand why we are discussing this? Because when this is called exchangeable, that means this calcium and this potassium, as well as this one, phosphorus, soluble, it's almost equivalent to exchangeable ones. Because these three, if they're exchangeable and they're soluble, most likely these nutrients are available for plants. They can be absorbed by plants. And compare the worm cast with those from the soil, it has been increased significantly. So do you see why worm cast is so good? Because they have nutrient, and this nutrient can be absorbed by plants. Yeah. So not only that, I think worms have a lot of function. Apart from recycling the nutrient, getting you more air into the soil, distributing the nutrient, they also have other special function. they also secretes a plant growth stimulant. And this plant growth stimulant is said to be EFE, they call it. Not sure what is EFE, but it's an enzyme. It's an enzyme that stimulate growth of the plant. Well, these are the other functions lah worms can do to the plants. Of course lah, and then if you read further from this slide, from this diagram, you can see that how earthworms eats the humus. This is the humus, humic acid, the organic matter from its mouth, and then they can calcify them, mix with clay, and then when the worm cast comes out, they have microbes together with the nitrogen. So earlier when I show you worm casts have higher nitrogen, and this is why. This is why. Because they actually converts urea into nitrate and also nitrous oxide. These are the source of the high nitrogen, which is also the nutrient for plants. Okay, one thing. Just now I told you that worm cast is a bit like brittle. It's a bit brittle with some air inside. Why they're brittle? You see here? Actually, earthworms can actually calcify something. They can actually extract calcium from the food and then mix it with mix it with carbon dioxide to form calcium carbonate pellets. These are very similar to the limestone. So these are the amazing things that earthworms can do. They actually capture carbon dioxide mixed with calcium. That makes it so brittle, the worm cast. So a brief description of the function of earthworms. These are the functions. So most likely in the test and final examination, last time, whenever you have final examination, we usually ask the students to explain what earthworms do in the soil that improves the soil quality. Now, when I say quality, it can be the structure, physical properties. So when I ask physical properties, you should give me the answer such as they burrow deep in the soil, they improve the soil aeration, it improves the absorption of moisture, absorption of gas. And in other words, I think you also can think of if there are more air inside the soil, what happened to the bulk density? It decrease. Yeah, some of you might say increase, but no. When there are more air inside the soil, bulk density decrease. So these are the physical aspect. Yeah? But sometimes my question may be very specific. I ask you, okay, how does earthworm increase the chemical properties of the soil? Then you should answer according to the nutrient. Okay, they increase the nitrogen, they increase the exchangeable calcium, they increase the solubility of phosphorus, things like that. Yeah. So don't just memorize this slide. I know this slide is the major key points of earthworms function, but you have to answer according to the question. That's what I have to remind you. Okay, so next part is soil arthropods. And I think it's already 30 minutes past. I recommend we take a 5-minute break. And I stop this recording right here so that you can get your 5-minute break.